October 14, 1940, 11:23 p.m. Five men walked into the Red Rooster Club on 138th Street. Not customers, not neighbors, Sicilian muscle sent by Lucky Luciano himself. The tallest one, Salvator Sally Burns Sabella, had a Thompson submachine gun under his coat. The message was simple. Bumpy Johnson had 48 hours to surrender control of Harlem's numbers racket, or they'd kill everyone he loved, burn down every business that paid him protection, and turn 125th Street into a war zone. Bumpy was sitting alone at the bar, drinking coffee, no bodyguards in sight, vulnerable, exposed. Sabella put the gun on the bar. "You got 2 days, Johnson. After that, we paint Harlem red." Bumpy looked at the gun, looked at Sabella, and said 6 words that would end the Italian mob's war for Harlem forever. "Tell Lucky I accept his offer." What nobody knew, what the 5 families never understood, is that Bumpy Johnson had spent the previous 6 months systematically destroying every lieutenant, every operation, every asset Lucky Luciano had in Harlem. And the words, "I accept his offer," weren't surrender. They were an invitation to Lucky's funeral in the underworld, because the offer Bumpy was accepting wasn't the one Lucky sent. It was the one Bumpy had created for Lucky to accept. To understand what happened that night at the Red Rooster, you need to understand what Harlem looked like in 1940 and who Bumpy Johnson had become. By October 1940, Harlem was 20 years into its golden age as the cultural capital of Black America. The Renaissance had brought artists, musicians, writers. Jazz clubs lined every major street. The Apollo Theater drew crowds from across the country. But underneath the culture, underneath the music and the art, was an economic war that most people never saw. The numbers racket. Poor folks betting pennies on 3-digit combinations, hoping to hit the lottery and change their lives. It seemed small, insignificant. But across Harlem, those pennies added up to $20 million a year. And whoever controlled the numbers controlled Harlem. In 1940, that person was Bumpy Johnson. But Bumpy hadn't started out on top. He'd fought for it. Through the 1930s, Bumpy had been the lieutenant, the enforcer, the muscle for Stephanie St. Clair, the French-Caribbean woman known as Queenie who'd built the numbers empire in Harlem. Bumpy had fought Dutch Schultz's attempts to take over. He'd survived assassination attempts, arrests, beatings. He'd gone to prison twice for Queenie, never once considering testimony or cooperation. By 1938, when Queenie decided to step back from the business, there was no question who would take over: Bumpy Johnson. At 31 years old, Bumpy was already a legend. 6 feet tall, impeccably dressed, educated, and articulate. He'd learned strategy from Queenie, who taught him that violence was a tool, not a solution. He'd learned politics from the black ministers and community leaders who saw him not as a criminal, but as a necessary protector. And he'd learned patience from watching Dutch Schultz make the fatal mistake of impatience, overplaying his hand, and getting himself murdered by the very Italian families who now wanted Harlem for themselves. Because that was the situation in 1940. Dutch Schultz was dead, killed by Lucky Luciano's commission in 1935. The numbers racket in the Bronx, Brooklyn, and Queens had all fallen to Italian control. Manhattan's Little Italy, the Lower East Side, Hell's Kitchen, all Italian territory. The only neighborhood that remained independent was Harlem. And Lucky Luciano, even from his prison cell in Dannemora, wanted it desperately. Not just for the money, though $20 million a year was nothing to dismiss, but for what it represented. Lucky had built the commission, the board of mob bosses that supposedly governed organized crime in New York. He'd created the 5-family structure. He'd modernized the mafia, turned it from old country vendetta culture into American business. And yet this black man in Harlem, this Bumpy Johnson, operated completely outside Lucky's control. It drove Lucky insane. Through 1939 and into 1940, Lucky had tried the usual approaches. He'd sent mediators to negotiate. Bumpy refused to meet them. He'd sent money offers promising Bumpy a percentage if he'd accept Italian oversight. Bumpy sent the money back with a note that said simply, "Harlem's not for sale." He'd even tried going around Bumpy, approaching other Harlem operators with better deals, trying to fracture the coalition that kept Bumpy in power. But Harlem remained loyal, because Bumpy did something the Italians never understood. He gave back. When families couldn't pay rent, Bumpy paid it. When the police arrested young men on trumped-up charges, Bumpy's lawyers got them released. When black businesses needed startup capital but couldn't get bank loans, Bumpy provided the money. He didn't do this out of charity. He did it because he understood that real power came from community trust. The Italians extracted money from their neighborhoods. Bumpy invested in his, and that difference meant everything. By September 1940, Lucky Luciano had run out of patience. September 18, 1940, Dannemora State Prison, New York. Lucky Luciano sat across a table from his underboss, Vito Genovese, who'd traveled 6 hours to receive orders. "This bumpy situation ends now," Lucky said, his voice low and cold. "I've been patient, I've been reasonable, I've offered him deals that any smart man would take. He's refused everything." "He thinks he's untouchable," Genovese said. "He thinks Harlem won't let anything happen to him." "Then we show him in Harlem what happens when you disrespect the commission. We don't ask anymore, we don't negotiate, we take." Genovese leaned forward. "You want him dead. I want everyone around him dead first. I want him to watch his organization collapse. Then I want him to accept our terms from a position of complete helplessness. And if he still refuses, then yes, we kill him, but we make it slow." That's when Genovese outlined the plan. It was elegant in its brutality. They wouldn't go after Bumpy directly. That had failed before. Instead, they'd systematically destroy everyone in his network. His collectors would disappear. His runners would be beaten until they couldn't work. His legitimate businesses would burn down from mysterious fires. His lawyers would find themselves under investigation. His political connections would be warned that associating with Bumpy was dangerous for their careers. And every 48 hours, they'd escalate. More violence, more destruction. Until Bumpy had no choice but to surrender or die. "How long do you give it?" Lucky asked. 6 weeks maximum," Genovese said. "No man can hold out when everyone around him is suffering. He'll cave." Lucky nodded. "Send Sally Burns to deliver the first message. I want Bumpy to understand this is serious." Salvator, Sally Burns, Sabella was Genovese's most reliable enforcer. Born in Palermo, raised in East Harlem, absolutely loyal to the Genovese family. He'd killed at least 15 men, though the actual number was probably higher. He didn't enjoy violence, but he was exceptionally good at it. On October 14th, Sabella gathered 4 of his most trusted men, all Sicilian, all experienced, all carrying weapons. Their orders were clear: find Bumpy Johnson, deliver the ultimatum, make it clear this wasn't a negotiation, and if Bumpy showed any resistance, make an example right there in front of witnesses. They found Bumpy at the Red Rooster, sitting alone at the bar. It seemed too easy. No bodyguards, no backup, just Bumpy drinking coffee, reading a newspaper. Sabella walked up, put his Thompson on the bar, and delivered Lucky's message. 48 hours. Surrender or die. What Sabella didn't know, what none of them knew, was that every word they'd said in planning this operation had already reached Bumpy's ears 3 days earlier. Because one of Genovese's drivers, a man named Marcus from Red Hook, had a cousin in Harlem who'd lost his job at the docks after Italian unions blackballed him for being black. Bumpy had gotten that man a new job, better pay, steady work. And when Marcus mentioned in passing that Genovese was planning something big against Bumpy Johnson, the cousin made a phone call. By the time Sabella walked into the Red Rooster on October 14th, Bumpy Johnson had known about Lucky's plan for 72 hours, and he'd spent those 72 hours setting a trap. 3 days earlier, October 11th, 1940, 6 a.m. Bumpy sat in his office above Small's Paradise with his 3 most trusted associates. Illinois Gordon, his strategic advisor, Junie Bayard, his head of security, and Nat Pettigrew, who managed Bumpy's legitimate business interests. "Lucky's done being patient," Bumpy told them. "They're coming after everyone around me, runners, collectors, businesses. They want to make it hurt until I give up." "So what do we do?" Gordon asked. "We let them think they're winning," Bumpy said, "and while they're congratulating themselves, we take everything they have in Harlem." Over the next 3 days, Bumpy executed a plan so precise, so surgical, that the Italians never saw it coming. First, he identified every Italian operation in Harlem. Not the major ones, everyone knew about those. The small ones. The protection rackets running out of grocery stores. The loan sharks operating from social clubs. The bookmakers taking bets on baseball games. The numbers runners who reported to Italian bosses. Bumpy had been cataloging these operations for months, watching them, learning their patterns. Now he was ready to move. Second, he reached out to every person who worked for Italian interests in Harlem. Not with threats, with offers. Double your current pay to work for me instead. Protection from retaliation. Job security, respect. Most of them said yes immediately. Working for the Italians meant being treated like garbage. Working for Bumpy meant being part of the community. By October 14th, Bumpy had flipped 47 people who'd been reporting to Italian operations. Third, and most importantly, Bumpy sent a message to Frank Costello. Not Lucky Luciano, not Vito Genovese. Frank Costello. Costello was the political fixer for the mob, the man who'd made connections with Tammany Hall, who'd built relationships with judges and cops and politicians. He was also the most pragmatic of the commission members. He understood that wars cost money, that violence attracted attention, and that the best deals were the ones where both sides could profit. Bumpy's message to Costello was simple: I know Lucky wants Harlem, but Lucky's in prison and his plan is going to fail. When it does, you and I should talk about an arrangement that works for both of us." Costello received the message on October 13th. He didn't respond, but he also didn't warn Lucky or Genovese. He wanted to see what Bumpy had in mind. So when Sally Burns Sabella walked into the Red Rooster on October 14th and put his gun on the bar, Bumpy already knew what he was going to say. The threat, the timeline, the ultimatum, and Bumpy's response, those 6 words, "Tell Lucky I accept his offer," was calculated to create exactly the confusion it did. Sabella stared at Bumpy, not sure he'd heard correctly. "You what?" "I accept Lucky's offer," Bumpy repeated calmly. "Harlem's too much trouble to hold on to alone. If Lucky wants in, he can have a partnership. 60-40 split. I run operations, he provides protection from the commission. Tell him I'll meet him anywhere he wants to discuss terms." Sabella had expected resistance, threats, maybe a shootout. He hadn't expected immediate surrender. "You're serious?" "Dead serious. I'm a businessman, Sally." Lucky made his point. "I can fight a war I'll probably lose, or I can accept reality and make money. I choose money." Sabella picked up his Thompson, confused but satisfied. "I'll relay the message." "You do that." After they left, Illinois Gordon appeared from the back room where he'd been listening. "You think they bought it?" "Doesn't matter if they bought it," Bumpy said. "What matters is they report it. By tomorrow afternoon, Lucky will think he's won. Vito will be celebrating. Frank Costello will be curious. And while they're all trying to figure out if I'm serious, we move." That night, October 14th into October 15th, Bumpy Johnson launched the most coordinated operation in Harlem's criminal history. Every Italian protection racket in Harlem was hit simultaneously. Not violently, strategically. The collectors showed up at businesses and found that the businesses had already paid someone else for protection, Bumpy's people. The collectors had no one to collect from. The loan sharks who operated from social clubs found their usual customers had already paid off their debts to a new lender, Bumpy's financing operation. The sharks had no one to squeeze. The bookmakers taking sports bets found that every regular bettor had switched to a Harlem-owned operation that offered better odds. The bookmakers had no action. And the Italian numbers runners discovered that every single street corner they usually worked from was now occupied by Bumpy's runners, who were offering better payouts and faster service. Within 24 hours, every single Italian revenue stream in Harlem had been cut off. Not destroyed, not attacked, just quietly, efficiently replaced. The Italian operators reported back to their bosses on October 15th. No violence had occurred, but they had zero income, zero operations. Zero presence. Vito Genovese couldn't believe the reports. "How?" he demanded. "How does an entire organization disappear in one day?" "They didn't disappear," one of his captains reported. "They just switched sides. Everyone who was working for us is now working for Bumpy. He must have been planning this for months." Genovese immediately called for a meeting. He wanted to hit back hard, but then something unexpected happened. On October 16th, 2 days after Sabella's visit to the Red Rooster, Bumpy Johnson requested a sit-down. Not with Genovese, with Frank Costello. The message was delivered through channels that couldn't be ignored. Bumpy wanted to talk business, real business, a proposal that would benefit everyone. Costello agreed to meet. October 18th, 1940, 3 p.m., a neutral location in Midtown Manhattan. Bumpy arrived alone. Costello brought 2 bodyguards but told them to wait outside. The 2 men sat across from each other in a private room in the back of a restaurant. Costello spoke first. "Lucky's furious. You made his men look like fools." "I didn't make them look like anything," Bumpy replied. "I just showed them reality. They don't belong in Harlem, never did, never will. And yet you said you'd accept a partnership." "I said I'd accept Lucky's offer. I never said which offer. Lucky made me an offer back in 1939. Stay out of his territory, he stays out of mine. I'm accepting that offer with one modification." "Which is?" "Harlem stays independent, completely. No Italian oversight, no commission involvement. In exchange, I guarantee that no Harlem operation expands into Italian territory. Brooklyn's yours, Queens is yours, the Bronx is yours, but Harlem is mine." Costello considered this. It was actually a reasonable deal. The commission had wasted resources trying to take Harlem for over a year. They'd accomplished nothing except creating hostility. "And what do we get in return for leaving you alone?" "Information," Bumpy said. "I hear things. Harlem has connections across the city. If someone's planning to move against the commission, I'll know about it before you do. I share that information. I also guarantee that any Italian who needs to operate in Harlem for legitimate business can do so without interference. Hotels, restaurants, whatever, but no rackets." Costello leaned back. "Lucky won't like it. Lucky's in prison, you're not, and you're practical enough to know that the deal I'm offering is better than anything you'll get through war." Costello was silent for a long moment, then he extended his hand. You got a deal, but you break it even once and we come for you with everything we have. Bumpy shook his hand. That's fair, you'll have my word in writing if you want it. Your word's enough, I've done my research, you don't break your word. They stood up. The meeting had lasted 15 minutes, and in those 15 minutes, Bumpy Johnson had accomplished what no other black operator had ever done. He negotiated independence from the Italian Mafia. Word of the deal spread through the underworld within 48 hours. By October 21st, every major criminal organization in New York knew that Harlem was officially off limits. The commission ratified the agreement, though Lucky Luciano was reportedly furious. Vito Genovese tried to argue against it, but Frank Costello had enough support to make it happen. For the first time in organized crime history, a territory had been recognized as independent outside commission control. The Italian operators who'd lost their Harlem operations weren't compensated. They'd failed to hold the territory, so they lost it. That was the rule. Sally Burns Sabella, the enforcer who delivered Lucky's ultimatum, reportedly said just 7 words when he heard what happened. That man played us like a violin. As for Bumpy, he went back to running Harlem the way he always had, protecting the community, investing in businesses, making sure that the money from numbers stayed in the neighborhood instead of flowing to bosses in Brooklyn or Queens. The agreement held for the rest of Bumpy's life. The Italians never again tried to take Harlem. And Bumpy never expanded into their territory. Both sides made money, both sides avoided war, and Harlem remained the only black-controlled territory in New York City's underworld for 3 decades. The story of October 1940 became legend, but most people missed the real lesson. They saw Bumpy's victory as a story about standing up to the mob, about refusing to back down, about strength. But that wasn't it. Bumpy's real victory was understanding what game he was playing. Lucky Luciano thought he was playing dominance. He wanted to conquer, to control, to prove that Italian power was absolute. Bumpy understood he was playing survival and independence. He didn't need to beat the Italians everywhere. He just needed to make Harlem too expensive to take and too valuable to destroy. He did that by building community loyalty, by making himself indispensable, by showing that a war for Harlem would cost more than it was worth. And then when the Italians came with their usual tactics, intimidation, violence, ultimatums, Bumpy didn't fight them head-on. He went around them. He took their operations. He approached the one boss who valued pragmatism over pride, and he offered a deal that gave everyone what they really needed. Lucky got to save face by claiming he'd negotiated a peace deal. Costello got to avoid an expensive war, and Bumpy got independence. The Italian mob tried to take Harlem with force for 5 years. Bumpy won it in a 15-minute conversation, because he understood something that most people never learn. Power isn't about who can hit hardest. It's about who understands what everyone else needs and how to give it to them while keeping what you need for yourself. If this story hit different, smash that subscribe button. Drop a like if you understand that the smartest move is the one nobody sees coming. Let me know in the comments, was Bumpy right to negotiate with Costello, or should he have fought Lucky to the end? And turn on notifications, because next time we're breaking down how Bumpy Johnson survived 15 years in prison and came out with more power than when he went in. You're not going to want to miss that. Remember, in Harlem, power wasn't taken. It was earned. And Bumpy Johnson earned every bit of his.